G'day guys, today I'll be building this cute little set of nesting tables out of Tasmanian Oak with a stained black base. Shimmy, shimmy, shimmy. Flush, flush. And this here is 8 legs, 4 shorter ones, 4 longer ones. Happy days, we'll let this dry and we'll come back tomorrow. And just like that, everything's nice and dry. So that's the little top, that's the big top. We don't need those for a while, so we'll put those aside. But I do need these legs. I need to take them out, square them up on the jointer, thickness them down and dock them to length, and then we can put the mortises in at the top to accept an apron rail around the top of the side tables. Happy days, they all came apart. I don't often do it this way, but this gives me a nice clean square edge and I don't have to worry about the glue because the saw blade passes straight through it, and now I can put these directly through the thicknesser knowing that I've already got a square edge. It's always worthwhile to take a minute to figure out exactly where you're going to put the mortise on each face to make sure that the finished product looks good. So I've got my router set up with an edge guide and a 1/4 inch upcut spiral bit to cut these mortises. Now I'm going to be using a haunched mortise and tenon for this. The reason for a haunched mortise and tenon is because since we're cutting the mortise at the top of the legs, the tiny little bit of timber left on top of the mortise, or at the top of the legs rather, becomes so weak and so fragile that any racking on these tables easily breaks off that little piece of timber. So if I simply cut it away now and replace that timber with the tenon on the end of the rails instead, I gain a little bit of glue surface on material that would otherwise break away if I just left it on the end of the mortise. That's the reason why we use a haunched mortise and tenon. Highly recommend it. You could use dowels and dominoes as well if you wanted to. So it's one full pass from the back of the mortise all the way through the top of the leg, about 10mm deep, and then I'm going to adjust my depth adjuster. I'll start at the back of the mortise, plunge about halfway down, thereabouts, and then I'm going to stop about 10mm from the top, and that leaves that little haunch at the top of the mortise that would otherwise break off if I've left it there as soon as the tables have racked. So there it is, the haunch mortise and tenon. And now that those mortises are done, I can start working on the rail. So I want to machine some material to be as thick as that distance there, plus the width of the mortise, plus that distance there again. So it's 6mm plus 6.35 plus 6mm is 18.35, and that allows me to put the tenon dead center of the thickness of my rails. And this is why it's so important for me anyway to get the tenons dead center of these rails, because if I remove 6mm off the bottom face here, just using a 4mm wide flat top ripping blade, which gives me a nice flat surface, by the time I flip it over and cut the same thing on the other side, I've removed 6mm and 6mm from a piece of timber that was 18.35mm thick. That tenon is now going to be exactly 6.35mm, which just happens to be the exact thickness of, or the diameter of my router bit that I've used to create the mortise. So This should fit into the mortise spot on beautifully, and it works every single time, most of the time. I got lucky this time though. The lower shoulder of these tenons is only 5mm high or thereabouts, so I can simply cut the shoulder and then drag it across the blade, and it cleans up all of that waste material nice and quick, nice and easy, without having to go back and forwards a million times. I like it. Now, because of the way that I cut the haunches in the mortises with the router earlier, I've only lined up the router roughly with a line that I had marked, so they're all ever so slightly different. So here I'll just cut away the waste of the haunch with a handsaw and a chisel. It's nice relaxing work, it gets it done, and I can match each of the haunches to each of the mortises so that it all matches. It'd be nice to have them all spot on perfect and I could just put it onto the saw, set up to one setting, but they're all going to be slightly different. So now I want to put a taper on these inside faces of the legs, make them slender, make them elegant, and it also makes it a little bit easier to lower the big table over the smaller table because it's like a cone into a cone. It just slots on there nicely. And once again, I find myself without a decent tapering jig, something that I've been telling myself to make for the last, I don't know, 50 years. I'm not even 50 years old, but for 50 years I've been telling myself to make this bloody jig, and I still haven't done it. So now I have to joint this down to the line, which is a fairly difficult thing, and it's very easy to screw up. But if I'm cool, calm and collected and I just pay attention to what I'm doing and take my time with it, I get it done and it comes up pretty good. And it is a better surface than a saw cut, but still, it takes a lot of time to get there. Now with all of these parts roughly shaped, I can get them sanded and then assembled. And when I sand these, I don't want to touch the fronts or the sides of those legs just yet. I do need to sand these tapers down. And I can't touch the front of that rail because the front of that rail is going to be exactly flush with the front of the leg. So when I've glued this up, there'll be a slight misalignment between those two pieces. I'll have to sand it up later. But what I do want to do is I want to put an arris all the way along this edge, and I would normally stop the arris just here, just below that rail there, but I'm going to put it all the way up to the top. I'm also going to arris that edge there so that when it comes together, it puts a little V between this rail and that leg there, a little bit of a design feature. And the main reason why I'm doing that is because I found that this leg here has a whole bunch of damage right there, so it's partially arrised already, so I have to continue it on. And the easiest way to put the small arris along the end of the rails is just to use the saw with the saw tilted over to 45 degrees. Just be really careful not to raise the saw blade so high that you cut your tenon in half. Now I'm hitting it on the bench like that because I'm trying to get this level with the top, and it was sitting up a little bit, so if I put it on the bench and tap that down, it levels it out for me, nice and easy. So that sits there quite nicely, it's not rocking, so that's a good sign. I'm just checking all of my joints that they pulled up well enough. There's not a massive gap, and there's not. So now I can just mess around with this band clamp and get it sorted. One beautiful little frame. Now we'll do the big one and I'll come back to you. Nice. 6'6", 6'6", 400, 400, 400, 400. Done. Piece of piss. Easy as that. And just like that, they're all dry, looking good, strong as an ox, or are they? Now if I was to get that there, and if I was to spread those legs apart like that, I would be able to snap those little joints very, very easily. So to make it stronger, I've got these little blocks here, which I'm going to put into this corner there. Glue on here, glue on there, put that in there, and that just adds a little bit more meat to that joint there. And then I'll also put corner bracing across there as well. Makes it strong as an ox. Little bit of glue, put him in the corner, happy days, we're done. See? Voila! Strong as an ox, I like it. And while those glue blocks were drying, I've gone ahead and made up some corner blocks. I've got a hole directly in the center and it's got two 45-degree cuts on it with a hole each side, so that'll sit inside this corner like so. I'll put a screw in there, a screw in there, and a screw comes up through and attaches the top to the frame later on. So a little bit of glue, screw and glue it, and she's done, baby. One of those in each corner on both of the tables and she's good as gold. So when I glued up these top panels, I glued them up as 3 components or 3 panels, and I want to make sure that it's symmetrical at the end, so I'm making sure that I'm cutting the same amount off each side so that it all ends up even. And since I'm already at the saw and I want to put a very small chamfer along the bottom edge of the top panels to give a little bit of a shadow line, I'll just do it here at the saw with the saw tilted over at 45 degrees. Happy days, too easy. Alright, so that looks really good. So that's the way that I'm going to leave it. I just need to knock that sharp edge off and that sharp edge off. Now what I was planning on doing, I was actually planning on putting a double bevel along this edge here. So I've got a bevel on that edge and I was going to put a bevel along there, which creates the same effect inside here and inside there. But I put this on top there, took a step back and I thought, well, that looks so good, that's the way I'm going to leave it. So I'm going to sand the top, sand these edges, sand the front of the legs, the front of the apron rails, take off any sharp edges, and then we'll throw some stain on it and get this finished. Now watch it just turn black. You see how it turns black before your eyes? It's magic. Watch that up the top there. So awesome. So I wanted to blacken out these frames, and when I say blacken out, I mean I want the timber to be black as the night. So I'm using an iron acetate solution, which is steel wool that has been put into vinegar for, well, in this case about 6 months, and it creates an iron acetate solution. And when you paint it onto the raw timber, a chemical reaction occurs between the tannins in the timber and the iron acetate solution, and it oxidizes. And in this case with Tasmanian oak, it always oxidizes a very dark grey, almost black, but it's not quite black enough, so I'm still going to go over this with black spirit stain just to blacken out the timber completely. Right, so with those bases dry, they've been drying for a couple of hours, it should be safe to put these raw tops on without transferring any of this black stuff onto it. We can see what the finished piece will look like if we have the black bottom and the natural top. Yeah, that looks really good. I like it. And so side by side, this one has the vinegar solution on there, and that has the vinegar solution and a black stain on there. So that's what we're going to do to this one now. We're going to put the black stain on there so it blackens out this grain as much as possible. So it's just a case of paint it on and come back tomorrow. And then to finish these off, after the black stain has dried, I'm just going to use some Minwax oil, paint it on and wipe it off. 2 or 3 coats should be good enough. And then with the stain and finish applied, it's just a case of screwing these tops to the bases and we are done. Well, there you have it, guys. A couple of really nice side tables that nest into each other. Nice tapered black legs, clear top, just looks just beautiful, elegant. I really liked the way that turned out. Now if you want to build some of these yourself, I'll have a link in the description below to a set of plans which include all of the critical dimensions, the critical joinery details, cutting lists and whatnot, so you'll be able to build these yourself. Now if you've made it this far into the video, a huge thank you for sticking around this long, and if you enjoy the work that I'm doing here, please consider subscribing to my channel. Apart from that, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.